or have another print disability which makes reading, holding a book, or turning a page difficult or impossible. The content is copyrighted by the respective publishers. For more information, please visit us on the web at nfradioreading.org.
Hello, this is Dasha, and for the next hour, I'll be reading from the July 17th issue of the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. Front page news above the fold: IBM's shocking profit warning comes amid AI reckoning. Big Blue bet on transparency ahead of earnings. Stock notched its worst day by Emily Glazer, Anissa Gardisi, and Lauren Thomas. IBM's board was staring down difficult news. The second quarter had been a bust. Directors had long known that the artificial intelligence revolution would upend the technology icon's business, but the pain came sooner than expected, leaving the company with a tough choice, according to people familiar with the discussions. Board members debated whether to issue a rare warning that bad news was coming, or wait for the numbers to hit the tape a week later when executives could discuss them with investors, the people said. After asking tough questions of Chief Executive Arvind Krishna, the board agreed to disclose the disappointing results in the hopes of winning credibility for transparency. This quarter we faltered, Krishna wrote in an investor letter that IBM published hours before markets opened on Tuesday. The stock plunged 25%, the worst day in the century-old company's history. International Business Machines, a company that helped send humans to the moon, is reckoning with the punishing realities of the AI boom. It is one of the first big corporations to confront the costs and disruptions of the fast-evolving technology and have to explain itself to investors. Even as IBM helps its customers adapt to the AI age, it was caught flat-footed by it. The news sparked discussions on Wall Street about whether IBM should be broken apart or an activist investor will come hunting. It isn't clear how much guidance the company will be able to give the investors when it reports full quarterly results next week, one of the people said. Krishna needs to get this straightened out quickly, because the last thing any 63-year-old CEO can afford is being stigmatized as a spotty executor that is responsible for historic sell-offs, said Don Bilson, head of event-driven research at Gordon Hassett, in a note to clients this week. IBM declined to comment. Krishna promised to go into deeper detail when he hosts a conference call next Wednesday. We have conviction in the strength of our portfolio and the strategic transformation of our business, the IBM boss wrote in his letter. Fears that AI tools from companies such as Anthropic and OpenAI would replace software rattled the shares of Salesforce, Workday, and Snowflake over the past year. IBM presents a different problem. Its warning this week showed that investments in AI infrastructure, such as memory and new cybersecurity concerns, are displacing spending on hardware, too. Squeezed between server orders and AI build-outs, some of IBM's customers now treat the tech giant as discretionary spending, said Daniel Morgan, a portfolio manager and analyst at Synovus Trust. I think you might see some, hey, we'll hold off on this for a couple quarters. We don't need to upgrade the new mainframe right now, Morgan said. That's kind of hurting them. Unlike other AI infrastructure providers and cloud companies such as NVIDIA, Google, and Oracle that rent computing capacity, sell chips, and offer networking hardware, IBM sells hardware and software systems that corporate customers install at their own sites. Its customer base includes leading financial services firms and retailers. The company's top leaders discussed whether it has become too reliant on large accounts that come with lumpy deals and upgrade cycles that they can push off in lean times, people familiar with the matter said. They talked about the need to diversify and court a wider range of customers, such as mid-sized companies. But it would take time to see if such an approach paid off, one person said. Board members will be watching to see if Krishna's team comes together because this would be a test of his leadership. Some also are concerned that the company might swing to a more conservative stance that could hamper growth. The board is expected to meet again in late July. One IBM alum who runs his own AI company praised Krishna for his candor and said the market reaction was overblown. The punishment doesn't fit the crime, Debanjan Saha, CEO of Data Robot, wrote on LinkedIn. This sell-off wasn't about a quarter. It was the market repricing a question. Can a 115-year-old enterprise company lead the agentic era or merely survive it? IBM reinvented itself many times, transitioning from tabulators and time clocks in its earliest days to personal computers, mainframes, and supercomputers, and later AI and hybrid cloud computing. Saha noted that the company survived antitrust battles, the PC wars, and the rise of the Internet. Every obituary was premature, he wrote. This one will be too. Krishna joined IBM in 1990 as a software engineer and was appointed in 2020 to succeed CEO Ginni Rometty. The selection of an executive who was Senior Vice President for Cloud and Cognitive Software signaled where the company was headed. IBM bought open-source software company Red Hat for $34 billion, a deal Krishna helped integrate and would become a major growth driver. Software accounted for about $30 billion of IBM's $67.5 billion in revenue last year. The company sharpened its focus on the cloud computing market with investments in hybrid cloud computing, software, and quantum computing. It spun off IT outsourcing business Kyndryl to further simplify the business and bought cloud software company HashiCorp. Krishna told people last year that he expected AI would replace about half the workforce in many workflows. Half of the work in many workflows, increasing productivity and job reallocations. IBM trimmed thousands of roles from its 260,000-person workforce and hosted reskilling programming for staffers. While Wall Street was initially skeptical of Krishna, his strategy started to bear fruit. As recently as last year, the company's army of consultants built up billions of dollars of bookings, helping customers navigate how generative AI would change their business, and its software business was growing. In April, IBM struck a first-of-its-kind settlement with the federal government, paying more than $17 million related to its diversity practices. The next month, the company's stock popped when the Trump administration awarded IBM $1 billion in grants to boost quantum computing. It said it would invest $1 billion of its own cash alongside the award to set up a specialized quantum chip manufacturing facility. The stocks dropped this week, pushed its market capitalization below $200 billion, leaving it dwarfed by companies such as Broadcom, $1.8 trillion, or AMD, $800 billion, that were once seen as small suppliers to giants like IBM. IBM and its advisors are aware that this week's bad news could make it vulnerable to an activist investor showing up in its shares or pushing it to examine potentially splitting the company up, according to people familiar with the matter. The quarterly warning was especially unusual coming from IBM, a blue chip that held a reputation among investors for results that are steady. For decades, IBM chief executives didn't even participate on earnings calls, leaving such matters to the company's financial executives. Board members are aware that the near term is likely to be messy, and that an impatient Wall Street is unlikely to tolerate 2 or 3 more quarters of underperformance, according to people familiar with the board discussion. Retail sales in U.S. grow at a slower pace, by Jessica Kawaki. Sales growth at U.S. retailers rose at a slower pace in June as consumers spent less on gasoline because of falling prices at the pump. Retailers' sales grew by 0.2% last month to $768.6 billion versus the 1% growth recorded in May, the Commerce Department said Thursday. That was in line with what the economists expected. Retail sales numbers are recorded in nominal terms and account for the total number of dollars spent. As consumers spent less on gasoline because of lower prices, spending growth slowed. Outside of gasoline spending, there were some signs of broader consumer strength. Spending at motor vehicle and parts dealers grew by 1.9% from the previous month. Spending in other discretionary categories, such as electronic and appliance stores, grew 0.8%. Student visas will be curbed, U.S. says, by Michelle Hackman and Marianne Levine. The Trump administration will limit how long a foreign student can remain in the U.S. on a student visa under a new regulation announced on Thursday, increasing the hurdles for foreign students and universities' ability to recruit them. The new policy, known as the, quote, duration of status, unquote, rule, would cap the length of a student visa at the number of years its holder is enrolled in a particular program, with a maximum of 4 years. Students would need to apply for an extension of status if they wanted to stay longer. For roughly the last 5 decades, student visas were granted for what was called the duration of status of their programs, meaning their student visa was valid for however many years their educational program lasted, plus optional practical training. Optional Practical Training, or OPT, is an immigration program that allows foreign students to work in the U.S. for up to 3 years after graduation. The new rule means foreign PhD students, whose programs typically run 6 years, would be required to apply for an extension and risk being denied well into their programs. It would also require nearly all students, for the first time, to apply for an extension to use their OPT. For decades, foreign studies have been admitted into the U.S. indefinitely, allowing thousands to abuse our immigration system by perpetually enrolling in courses to avoid having to leave the U.S., said Department of Homeland Security Secretary Markwayne Mullin. By implementing clear, finite limits on these visas, the United States is reclaiming its ability to properly screen, vet, and monitor individuals within our borders. The rule is another major piece of the Trump administration's project to reduce nearly all forms of legal immigration. Many hardliners in Trump's orbit have long pointed to the student visa as a way for foreign students to improperly prolong their stays by enrolling in additional courses. Immigration restrictionists have particularly disliked the OPT program, which, they argue, allows U.S. companies to hire foreign students directly after graduation without any regulations to ensure they aren't being paid less than American-born graduates. Companies in Silicon Valley and on Wall Street most often hire new university graduates on OPT before applying for longer-term visas for them, such as the H-1B. If students can't use their OPT, they are much less likely to qualify for an H-1B, curtailing their chances of remaining in the U.S. long-term after studying here. Under the first Trump administration, top immigration officials argued to kill a program known as STEM OPT, which grants 3 years of work authorization to graduates with math or science degrees. They were overruled by more business-minded members of the administration, and the program survived. The new rule also would reduce the amount of time foreign students can prepare to leave, change schools, or status after graduation to 30 days from 60 days. When filing for an extension of status, students would also need to demonstrate their academic success and financial stability. It will allow for the government to root out potential inappropriate uses of student visas. It also likely would deter many foreign students, particularly those entering graduate programs, from choosing to study in the U.S. because of the uncertainty about whether they'll be able to finish their programs or work in the country after graduation. The rule would also affect foreign media who come to the U.S. on I visas, which previously could be granted to Western media for as long as 5 years. Under the final rule, most of these visas will have a cap of 240 days. For Chinese citizens, the cap will be 90 days. From World Watch, ex-CEO 31 guilty in bridge collapse. A court on Thursday convicted Giovanni Castellucci, the former CEO of Italy's main highway operator, and 31 others in the 2018 Genoa highway bridge collapse that sent vehicles plunging and killed 43 people, a disaster that exposed serious lapses in the maintenance of an Italian infrastructure. Dozens of family members of the victims packed the courtroom as Chief Judge Paolo Lepri read the verdicts against 57 defendants, including former executives and officials. A representative for the families of victims, Egile Posetti, expressed satisfaction with the verdicts. Castellucci was sentenced to 12 years in prison, the longest sentence handed down. His lawyers said they would appeal. That was from the Associated Press. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From the opinion pages, Potomac Watch by Kimberly A. Strassel, President Vance goes AWOL. Republicans were eagerly awaiting their Tuesday meeting with Vice President J.D. Vance, hoping he'd break Congress's gridlock. They instead were notified of a scheduling conflict as Air Force Two winged to Texas. Wednesday was spent watching Mr. Vance on the Joe Rogan Experience, where he bashed the Senate for its procedural bullshit. The vice president is taking flack for his failed Iran negotiations, but a different criticism has reached full boil in Washington. The House is down to 20 legislative days before the midterms, the Senate to 30. The list of unfinished business is overwhelming. A reconciliation bill, appropriations, annual defense policy legislation, an Iran supplemental funding bill, FISA, permitting online safety, aviation reform, farm and highway bills. Every item is mired in internal arguments over priorities and strategy. President Trump's time is splintered between a war and dozens of competing domestic demands and pet objectives. Congress is crying out for a dedicated White House ambassador, someone who can be trusted to speak for the president, to yay or nay ideas, to shuttle proposals, and to wrangle rebels in line. Mr. Vance is promoting a book. The vice president's job can be unenviable, but it's unique in one way. It's the only top position with responsibilities across two branches of government. The vice president is part of the White House team, but he's also president of the Senate. Modern vice presidents have leaned into the latter role, especially those who came out of Congress. Walter Mondale pioneered the liaison job, bridging the gap between the outsider President Jimmy Carter and Mondale's former congressional colleagues, Dick Cheney, once House Minority Whip, held weekly policy luncheons with Senate Republicans in the Capitol. Joe Biden used decades of congressional experience to land deals that eluded other White House staff. Mike Pence, previously House Republican Conference chairman, practically camped out on the Hill during key policy debates like the 2017 tax reform. By contrast, lawmakers can count on a few fingers the times former Senator Vance has set foot in the Capitol. As they twist in the legislative winds, they glimpse him mainly on TV and podcast book tour, Real Time with Bill Maher, CBS News Sunday Morning, Fox News, even ABC's The View, or he's in Switzerland leading fruitless Iran negotiations. The anger has only grown over Mr. Vance's decision to position himself as a scolder of the body over which he constitutionally presides, rather than showing up for the work. As we approach incredibly consequential midterms for this nation and this presidency, Senate Republicans are pretty confused as to why the president of the Senate is actively criticizing the GOP, while also being absent from his Senate duties. One Republican senator tells me. Members feel that this is an absence that's particularly derelict, given circumstances and timing. This GOP Congress had a productive first year, managing to pass the One Big Beautiful Bill Act, confirm nominations in record time, and use the Congressional Review Act to roll back Biden regulations. That productivity was thanks to White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles, who kept communication flowing and the train on the tracks. But she is now undergoing breast cancer treatment and has left a real gap. The White House's Office of Legislative Affairs is no replacement. It's capable, but doesn't speak for the boss, who himself has no legislative experience and of late rubbed lawmakers the wrong way. Communication has devolved into a game of Trump telephone, in which whatever member last snagged 2 cell phone minutes with the president rushes to read the tea leaves to colleagues. This breakdown is an enormous factor in Congress's unfocused 2026. It's a critical moment. Midterms are coming, and Republicans are concerned the Democrats will shut down the government in October and blame it on the GOP. Republicans still hold a trifecta, meaning they can notch real victories. Yet the House is down to a minuscule majority, and Senate Republicans are handicapped by the death of Senator Lindsey Graham and the hospitalization of Senator Mitch McConnell. Never have they needed more an empowered White House bridge to hammer out a basic political strategy. The glaringly obvious candidate is Mr. Vance. He was in the Senate less than 2 years ago. He is, by his reports, trusted by the president, yet he's nowhere. Members hugely appreciate frequent visits from energetic cabinet members, notably Secretary of State Marco Rubio and Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth, but it only further highlights the vice president's lack of interest. And it fuels criticism that Mr. Vance is putting his presidential ambitions ahead of a GOP Congress's success. Worse, that he is bashing his own party to win praise from online influencers. What experienced legislators wish the newbie Mr. Vance would understand is that his resume polishing is doing no one any favors. Not the party, not the president, not even himself. The midterms and the 2028 presidential election will rest on the GOP's governing record. This year is fading, and Mr. Vance should he become the nominee, will own any failures. Now might be a good time for the Senate president to show up at the Senate. Zachary Marshall, editor-in-chief of the Leadership Institute's Campus Reform, has an article entitled "Less is More in Higher Education." American universities can't afford complacency. Tuition is too high, standards are too low, and administrators emphasize experience over academics. That makes Virginia and Ohio's venture to develop 3-year bachelor's degree programs good news. A 90-credit bachelor's degree instead of the standard 120 would reduce waste and save families about 25% in tuition. For too long, universities have increased tuition, which is now more than $100,000 a year at some schools. But the 4-year model isn't untouchable. Colleges make money when more students stay longer. Tuition, housing, dining fees, athletics, facilities, and campus amenities all depend on keeping students enrolled in a costly ecosystem. 3-year degrees would disrupt that by putting students' interests ahead of the institutions. Most students don't need years to explore electives and declare a major. They need clear requirements, serious majors, sound advice, and firm deadlines. We need to stop thinking of college as a time to find oneself and recast it as a period of intellectual development that precedes our more formative mid to late 20s. Universities should streamline general education requirements, trim unnecessary electives, and make students declare their majors by the end of freshman year. These changes are productive guardrails, not punitive restrictions. I know this can work. I completed a double major in politics and cinema studies at New York University in 3.5 years by using advanced placement and internship credits and avoiding electives that didn't move me toward graduation. A 3-year program also might arrest the ideological sprawl and runaway spending that plague higher education. Reports show that before DEI bans took effect in more than a dozen states, 2/3 of American universities mandated DEI courses that took up to 40 million student hours and cost $1.8 billion every 4 years to maintain. Students don't need more politicized course requirements that displace core classes. They need writing, history, math, science, economics, literature, and civic knowledge. Remedial education doesn't belong in higher ed. Universities have admitted too many students who were failed by K-12 schools and arrive unable to read demanding books, write coherent essays, or complete college-level math. The answer is to raise standards and expectations. Colleges shouldn't admit students who need remedial work. Academic calendars also need reform. Month-long winter breaks and 3-month summer vacations are outdated customs based on historical agrarian calendars. Calendar year schedules would benefit students who want to enter the workforce sooner. Virginia and Ohio are showing leadership with their initiative. Undergraduates can complete bachelor's degrees in 3 years if colleges become leaner and more mission-focused. The goal isn't less education, it's less waste. In letters to the editor regarding Medicaid spending and the free market fix, Medicaid spending may be soaring, but it is not because of increased costs in patient care. There was a review and outlook on July 14th. It is because of middlemen, managed care, insurers, and artificially high drug prices. Most physicians have seen drastic cuts in Medicaid reimbursement to less than half of Medicare. This isn't sustainable. Add to this an increase in prior authorizations, and the cost of doing business far exceeds the payments, making a practice balance sheet insolvent. Medicare Advantage is another version of the ACA and a way for insurers to own the healthcare dollar, which by rights belongs to the patient. If you want to fix healthcare, it's easy. Just give the dollar to the patient, remove the data collecting middlemen, force hospitals and physicians to show their price, and there's plenty to take care of the poor without charge. It's called a free market. This is from Paula Muto, MD, FACS of Andover, Massachusetts. From Adam Lipson in New York, the article None's Secret of Mamdani's Success on July 13th. Regarding your editorial, New York's debate over Mayor Zohran Mamdani's agenda treats capitalism and a strong safety net as rivals. They aren't. Sweden, the model often invoked by the mayor's allies, has no wealth tax and no inheritance tax, and its corporate rate is 20.6%. Stockholm scrapped its wealth tax 2 decades ago precisely because it was driving capital and entrepreneurs abroad. The benefits New Yorkers admire in Scandinavia are funded by economies built to attract investment, not tax it into leaving. New York already relies on a narrow base. A small share of high earners generates an outsized share of the city revenue. Policies that push them elsewhere don't merely cost the city revenue. They shrink the base that pays for the programs Mr. Mamdani wants to expand. Compassion and growth aren't opposing values, but a city that forgets which one pays for the other will eventually have neither. The New York Times seeks to quash president's subpoenas of reporters by Alexander Bruhl. The New York Times filed a motion Wednesday to quash the Trump administration's subpoenas of several reporters, saying the requests were part of an effort to punish the Times for its coverage and violated journalists' constitutional rights. FBI agents served subpoenas to Times journalists Julian E. Barnes, Eric Lipton, and Eric Schmidt in their homes on Friday, demanding they appear before a grand jury in the Southern District of New York and disclose confidential sources, said David McCraw, Senior Vice President and Deputy General Counsel at the Times. The administration also attempted to serve subpoenas to Times reporters Tyler Pager and Adam Goldman, but didn't do so, said a person familiar with the matter. The subpoenas came 2 days after the Times reported that President Trump flew out of Turkey aboard an older Air Force One plane rather than on the new luxury jet as a security precaution. The Times also reported that the jet gifted by the Qataris lacked some of the advanced defensive capabilities included in the previous model. The Times' motion to quash the subpoenas was filed under seal, pursuant to a court order, McCraw said. The Times believes that the public has a right to information about this case and is also seeking to have the papers unsealed. The Trump administration has taken an increasingly aggressive stance toward the media and has pushed hard to stop leaks from federal officials. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth said in a video posted to social media Monday that the Defense Department and Justice Department created a joint task force to identify and prosecute leakers. To leak sensitive national defense information and secrets betrays the men and women who wear our nation's uniform, Hegseth said. The Wall Street Journal and its reporters received grand jury subpoenas dated March 4th that sought information related to a February article about the Pentagon raising concerns to Trump about the risks of an extended military campaign against Iran. A Dow Jones spokesperson said the subpoenas were later withdrawn. The Washington Post reported last month that one of its journalists was subpoenaed related to sensitive reporting about a national security measure. The subpoena was later withdrawn, the Post reported. Acting Attorney General Todd Blanche said at his confirmation hearing before the Senate Judiciary Committee on Wednesday that he authorized the subpoenas for the Times journalists. "We're not targeting reporters," he said. "They're material witnesses, just like a reporter would be a material witness to a car crash." The Justice Department didn't respond to a request for comment on the Times motion. You are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. What to know about the claims by Trump of election interference? By Vera Bergengren, Louise Radnofsky, and Sadie Gurman. President Trump, in a primetime address to the nation Thursday, was expected to talk about U.S. election security and alleged attempts by foreign governments to interfere in domestic political contests. The speech was likely to give him a platform to reassert his long-running claims that fraud and foreign meddling contributed to his 2020 election loss to Joe Biden. Since Trump returned to office, the effort to revisit 2020 has extended from the White House and Justice Department to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and intelligence agencies in a broad search for evidence supporting his allegations. The president is pushing for changes to how elections are run, some of which have faced pushback from courts and his own Republican Party. Here is what to know about alleged foreign influence in recent elections. China. A U.S. intelligence assessment released in March 2021 assessed with, quote, high confidence that Beijing considered an influence campaign to affect the outcome of the 2020 election, but didn't deploy it. The U.S. intelligence community found no indication that China or any other foreign actor tried to alter voter registration, ballots, vote counting, or the reporting of the results of the 2020 election. They further concluded that China didn't attempt to compromise election infrastructure or fund American candidates or political parties. Venezuela. The U.S. intelligence community concluded that former Venezuelan leader Nicolás Maduro wanted to influence American public opinion against Trump, but that his government probably lacked the capability to carry out such an effort. The assessment said U.S. intelligence had, quote, no information suggesting that the current or former Venezuelan regimes were involved in attempts to compromise U.S. election infrastructure, end quote. Iran. Trump has talked before about his belief that Iran tried to stop him winning the 2020 and 2024 presidential elections. Trump, in a social media post this year, appeared to draw a connection between current military hostilities and past Iranian influence efforts. Iran tried to interfere in 2020-2024 elections to stop Trump and now faces renewed war with the United States, he wrote. The Justice Department in 2024 charged 3 members of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps with hacking Trump's re-election campaign. In an assessment made public in March 2021, U.S. intelligence officials said Iran's former supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei, approved a digital scheme to undercut Trump's 2020 re-election bid. Officials and election integrity experts have said it is impossible to gauge to what extent, if at all, foreign operators influence voters. Because Iran's campaign was quickly detected and not especially sophisticated, officials had long viewed it as unsuccessful. Russia. The U.S. intelligence community concluded that Russia interfered in the 2016 election to help elect Trump, and a bipartisan Senate report said the assessment was accurate. Russia has denied interfering in the 2016 election. The 2016 assessment and subsequent reports across the intelligence community appear to impugn the legitimacy of Trump's victory, stoking his ire and distrust of U.S. intelligence agencies. Reinvestigation. After the 2020 contest, Trump clashed with then Attorney General William Barr over claims that the vote was riddled with fraud, which Barr said were refuted by a Justice Department review. Barr has maintained the department found no evidence of widespread voter fraud that would change the outcome of the 2020 election. Still, Trump's second administration has taken steps to reinvestigate the results, including through an extraordinary FBI search of the main election office in Fulton County, Georgia, in January. Agents carted away more than 600 boxes of ballots and other election materials that the county has unsuccessfully sought to have returned. Prosecutors have said in court filings, that they want to interview some poll workers and ballot counters who participated. Turning to business and finance section, shrinking diesel supply threatens to spur inflation by Colin Eaton. American consumers caught the biggest break in inflation in 5 years by at least one measure last month. But a sharp drop in diesel supplies threatens to reverse the trend and boost prices for everything from dog food to lumber. U.S. diesel futures have surged about 20% since the beginning of last week, while the U.S. and Iran continue vying for control of the Strait of Hormuz. The resurgent conflict compounds market fears of a diesel shortfall after Russia, one of the world's largest suppliers, banned exports. Prices will likely keep climbing as domestic stockpiles, already close to the lowest mark since the early 2000s, continue thinning, analysts warn. The supply crunch is showing up at the pump. The national average for a gallon of diesel rose to $5.01 on Thursday. Retail prices could soon climb an additional 20 to 25 cents a gallon, analysts say, after peaking near $5.70 in April. This poses another potential headwind for the economy by fanning worries about inflation and driving government borrowing costs higher. Elevated diesel prices can weigh on U.S. consumers as much as gasoline, though the impact is more diffuse and perhaps less obvious. Higher diesel relates to everything that gets moved around, said Ed Hurst, an economist at University of Houston. In terms of the midterm elections, Trump has given Democrats the "It's the economy, stupid" slogan. The long-haul semi-trucks that move goods across the country burn more than 100 million gallons of the fuel each day. Truckers pass those costs on to retailers, which in turn charge more for groceries, gadgets, cars, and home building materials. American farmers, already stung by President Trump's tariffs, rely on diesel to fuel tractors and get their goods to market. Diesel futures are up more than 85% since the start of the year. Trump is running out of time to achieve his goals in Iran. His Republican allies in Congress want to see the rise in fuel prices stemmed well ahead of the midterm elections. Iran, meanwhile, is using missile attacks on tankers to try to maintain its control over the strait, which has given it leverage in past negotiations. In the wake of Russia's 2022 invasion of Ukraine, economists closely linked a surge in diesel prices to a broader bout of inflation that affected virtually every corner of American life. Persistent inflation bedeviled Democrats who went on to lose the White House and Congress in 2024. Trump, for his part, has vowed countless times to rein in inflation. Tuesday's inflation report offered good news that economists say is likely fleeting. Consumer prices declined in June for May, the first month of falling prices in 2 years, according to the Labor Department. And excluding the food and energy categories, core prices were flat month after month, the first month without rising prices in more than 5 years. Diesel inventories in the U.S. ticked up about 4.6 million barrels in the latest week, the Energy Department said Wednesday, but they are down 10% since late February and approaching the lowest level since 2003. We're seeing some of the fundamentals tighten again following the end of the U.S.-Iran ceasefire, said Dan Pickering, Chief Investment Officer at Pickering Energy Partners. You now have significant incentive to produce diesel from global refineries. Yet the U.S. is one of the world's last major diesel suppliers. American exports are expected to climb to near record levels in July, according to market intelligence firm Kepler. The strait's closure has largely blocked the Middle East's prolific exports. Russia banned diesel shipments last week after Ukraine hit its refineries with long-range drone attacks. South Korea, Japan, and India have curtailed exports too. China reversed course recently after a 4-month ban on fuel exports. All told, roughly 7 million barrels a day of global refining capacity is shut, as are 800,000 barrels a day of Russia's diesel exports, which made up roughly 11% of the global seaborne diesel, according to vessel tracker Vortexa. U.S. refineries have some catching up to do. American fuel makers largely have to choose between making more jet fuel or diesel. In the spring, they staved off a jet fuel crisis by slashing their diesel output. U.S. refineries boosted jet fuel production to record levels of 2.2 million barrels a day last month, up from 1.7 million before the war. Meanwhile, they reduced diesel output to 4.7 million barrels a day in May from about 5 million in late March, and only in recent weeks have they ramped production back up, according to the Energy Information Administration. Jet fuel prices on the Gulf Coast had surged more than 80% from the start of the war to a peak of $4.45 a gallon in mid-May, according to FactSet. They have since come back down to $2.83. Jet fuel demand is about half as robust as diesel demand, so a shortage of the former can be solved faster than shortfalls in other fuels, said Denton Cinquegranda, chief oil analyst at energy data and analytics provider Opus, a Dow Jones company. The jet fuel issue seems to have really calmed down, and that's because refineries really ramped up, he added. Netflix forecasts slowdown in sales and profit, by Jessica Tunho. Netflix said it expects revenue and profit gains to slow in the third quarter, exacerbating investor fears that the company's growth is topping out. Shares fell more than 8% in after-hours trading after the company forecast revenue growth of 11.7%, its smallest year-over-year increase of any quarter since late 2023. The company reported second quarter revenue of $12.56 billion, up more than 13% from the same period a year earlier. Net income rose almost 9% to $3.4 billion. The results were roughly in line with analysts' expectations. Netflix attributed the second quarter gains in part to recent price increases and growth in advertising. Before Thursday's results were released, the streamer's stock had already fallen more than 40% over the prior year, a signal that investors are concerned about its opportunities to continue expanding its reach or revenue. The stock decline started when Netflix was exploring a bid for Warner Bros. Discovery Studio and streaming service, a departure in strategy for the company. It has continued to drop even after Netflix lost out on the acquisition. Netflix said on Thursday that viewers watched more than 97 billion hours of content on its service in the first half of 2026, up 1.5% from the second half of 2025 and 1.9% from the first half of last year. Netflix executives have been focused on finding ways to get subscribers to spend more time on its service. Such measures are crucial to streamers as they signal that customers are satisfied and less likely to cancel their subscriptions. Netflix's churn, the rate at which customers cancel, is by far the best in the industry at 2.11% for June, according to the research firm Antenna. Over the past quarter, some of the streamer's most popular debuts included Harlan Coben's I Will Find You and the second season of Beef. The company said Thursday it will shift to an annual release of its What We Watched report, which details how much time viewers spent watching its shows and movies. Until now, it had released that biannually. Netflix said subscriber growth helped contribute to the quarter's strength. It stopped releasing quarterly subscriber counts early last year. Last week, it began testing free trials for people who'd never subscribed in a number of markets around the world. Overall, our engagement remains healthy, and as with all things we do, we are working hard to improve every day, the company said in its letter to shareholders. To bolster engagement, executives have recently discussed adding live channels that would continuously stream certain programs or shows and films from a certain genre, as well as bundling with other streaming services, the Wall Street Journal previously reported. Netflix also has been adding video podcasts to its service and continues to look for live sports and events to add to its service. The company expects live events to make up 5% of its content budget this year. The company's operating margin retracted to 33.4% in the second quarter, from 34.1% a year earlier, but still higher than the 32.6% it projected. Free cash flow fell to $1.53 billion in the second quarter, from $2.27 billion a year earlier, owing in part to tax payments from its Warner termination fee. Netflix narrowed its revenue forecast for the year to between $51 billion and $51.4 billion. It previously forecast revenue in the range of $50.7 billion to $51.7 billion. In Money and Investing, Goldman Sachs reported blockbuster earnings this week. It turns out it isn't so bad at predicting soccer tournaments either. More than a month ago, the bank's economic team forecast that Spain and Argentina would meet in the World Cup final. And that's exactly what's happening. Goldman has been predicting the World Cup for decades. It adopted a more scientific approach in 2014, employing a model that was refined to include factors such as past performance, scoring talent, and geography. Teams tend to perform better closer to home. This year, Goldman's results for the 72 group stage games were decent. It correctly predicted 3 of the 4 semifinalists. The bank's pre-tournament forecast will only look better if Spain defeats Argentina. It predicted France would win the third-place game, which will take place Saturday. You're listening to a reading of articles and features from the Wall Street Journal on the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service. From Heard on the Street, Look Out Below When the Price Isn't Right, by Spencer Jacob. That ridiculously overvalued stock you just sold looked fine to whoever paid you for it. Prices aren't wrong, except when they definitely are. It tends to happen when markets get bubbly, with the latest example being the U.S.-listed shares of SK Hynix. The red-hot Korean memory chip maker raised $26.51 billion last week by selling American depository receipts, which U.S. investors can buy in dollars. They have the same claim on earnings as the Seoul-listed shares, but can't yet be converted back and forth. Demand for the U.S. version pushed their price to nearly 50% premium to the Korean ones this week. The violation of the law of one price happens when it's hard for sophisticated traders to profit from such differences, and often when many novice investors just piled into the market. The most famous example occurred a week before the technology bubble burst when Palm, the maker of then popular Palm Pilots, was partially sold by parent 3Com. Despite the Wall Street Journal and others pointing it out, 3Com's remaining Palm stake should have made its price at least 80% higher. Arbitrageurs would have loved to close the gap but couldn't borrow Palm shares to then sell short. Closed-end funds that can't just be sold for the net asset value often get out of kilter. Back in late 1989, weeks before the peak of Japan's epic boom, its enthusiastic investors piled into shares of the Germany fund after the Berlin Wall fell. It swung from a typical 10% discount to a 100% premium. More recently, the Destiny Tech 100 fund, which held private shares of SpaceX, surged ahead of that stock's June IPO to well above its NAV. It's since down by 60%. Lunacy cuts both ways. For investors who found it daunting to buy Bitcoin during its 2017 rally, the closed-end Grayscale Bitcoin Trust offered a one-click solution. That simplicity boosted its value to more than 100% premium to the cryptocurrency it controlled. After Bitcoin buying got easier, investors rightly balked at paying fat fees for the privilege. Grayscale went to the opposite extreme in 2023, a discount of as much as 45%. Anyone confident in Grayscale's lobbying to turn its trust into an ETF would succeed. It did. Made a fortune. You can justify whatever price you want for SK Hynix, SpaceX, or Bitcoin, but not 2 prices. As much as individual investors might resent hedge fund pros, their greed around mispricing can protect you from yours. Tempted to try your hand when they can't step in? Watch out. Taking just one side of any of these mispricings could have turned out badly. Instead, view them as a sign that your fellow investors might be a bit too excited. Uber to buy Delivery Hero for $14.8 billion by Najat Kantar and Adria Kalatayud. Uber Technologies agreed to buy Delivery Hero in a deal that values the German company at $14.8 billion and brings together 2 of the world's biggest food delivery platforms. The San Francisco-based company said on Thursday that the deal would significantly expand its international footprint, adding operations in 50 markets around the world from Asia to Latin America. The proposed tie-up is the latest sign of consolidation in the food delivery industry. DoorDash agreed to buy Britain's Deliveroo last year, while tech investor Prosus, owner of iFood, has snapped up Amsterdam-based JustEatTakeaway.com. Uber was already Delivery Hero's largest shareholder, having steadily increased its stake in recent months. It had an earlier takeover approach rejected in May. Delivery Hero said its board supported Uber's latest offer, adding that joining forces would secure the company's future competitiveness. Under Thursday's deal, Uber is offering €41.50, equivalent to $47.49, a share in cash, up from its earlier proposal of €33 a share in March. Delivery Hero stock has nearly doubled in value over the past 3 months, driven by Uber's stake building and expectations of a possible takeover. The company said this week that the two sides were in advanced talks about a deal. Uber already holds a direct stake of 24.99% in Delivery Hero and has exposure to an additional 11.84% through financial contracts. Prosus, Delivery Hero's second largest shareholder, said it would sell its remaining 16.8% stake in the company as a part of the takeover. Delivery Hero has struck a separate $1.6 billion deal to sell its businesses in 14 countries, including a chunk of its European operations, to SSW Partners, a New York-based investment group. The sale covers markets where Uber Eats and Delivery Hero already overlap and is subject to the larger takeover deal's completion. For Uber, the takeover will extend its mobility and delivery platform to 99 markets, creating a group with combined gross bookings of $236 billion. The businesses Uber is acquiring in the deal generated gross bookings of $42 billion last year and include local food delivery brands in South Korea, Italy, Nigeria, and Argentina. Uber has pledged to retain Delivery Hero's headquarters and keep its workforce in Berlin until at least 2029. It has also earmarked €2 billion for investments in Germany over the next 5 years. For Delivery Hero, the deal comes as the company had been looking into shuffle its portfolio. This year, it said its co-founder and longtime chief executive, Niklas Östberg, would step down. Eli Lilly to buy psychedelic maker Atai Beckley for initial $2.8 billion by Colin Kelleher. Eli Lilly has struck a deal to buy mental health-focused Atai Beckley for an initial $2.8 billion, continuing the drug maker's recent buying spree. Eli Lilly on Thursday said it would pay $6.75 a share in cash for Atai Beckley, a 26% premium to Wednesday's closing price of $5.36 for the New York clinical stage biopharmaceutical company. The deal also includes contingent value rights worth up to an additional $1 billion, or $2.50 a share, tied to Atai Beckley's pipeline of therapeutics for mental health conditions, including psychedelic therapies, such as its lead program, BPL-003, which is aimed at providing relief from treatment-resistant depression, Eli Lilly said. The contingent value rights would bring the total potential deal value to $3.8 billion, or $9.25 a share. Atai Beckley shares closed up 33% Thursday to $7.15 in NASDAQ trading. Atai Beckley's BPL-003 is a synthetic form of the psychedelic compound 5-MeO-DMT that is administered by nasal spray for treatment-resistant depression. Atai Beckley shares got a lift in April when President Trump signed an executive order aimed at accelerating research and patient access to psychedelic medicines for the treatment of mental illnesses. Eli Lilly said it expects to complete the Atai Beckley acquisition, which bolsters its neuroscience pipeline, in the third quarter. The deal is the latest in a string of acquisitions by the Indianapolis company, which is flush with cash from its market-leading weight loss drug franchise. Eli Lilly in late May agreed to acquire 3 vaccine developers in deals valued up to $4 billion combined, marking a new push into infectious disease prevention. Earlier in the year, the company struck deals each valued at less than $10 billion to buy cancer biotech Colonia Therapeutics, blood cancer-focused Ajax Therapeutics, sleep drug maker Centessa Pharmaceuticals, and genetic medicine biotechnology company Orna Therapeutics and biotech Ventix Biosciences. Verizon plans to cut about 3,000 jobs by Patience Hagan and Catherine Hamilton. Verizon Communications is cutting roughly 3,000 workers as part of a move to close hundreds of its retail stores. The company plans to divest itself of 274 of its retail stores to franchise owners, according to a company spokesman Thursday. Verizon would still own about 1,000 retail stores after the divestment. Management has decided Verizon needs a minimum of 1,000 corporate-owned stores for the next 3 years as part of its long-term strategy, according to an internal memo reviewed by the Wall Street Journal. Most of Verizon's layoffs would come from the retail store divestiture. However, the total also includes about 500 Verizon corporate employees, people familiar with the matter said. The company had about 89,900 full-time employees as of the end of 2025, according to its annual report. The news echoes a move Verizon took last fall when it divested itself of about 200 retail stores in conjunction with its largest round of layoffs, which reduced its workforce by more than 13,000. GE Aerospace has a strong quarter, but shares suffer by Catherine Hamilton. GE Aerospace raised its outlook for the full year, but said supply chain issues are still resulting in slower production and delivery delays. The maker of jet engines said Thursday it is struggling to get access to the materials it needs for its products and services. As a result, delays on spare parts shipments increased 20% sequentially in the second quarter. As much as we're pleased with the delivery increases, our spare parts delinquencies are up, unfortunately, Chief Executive Larry Culp said. Shares fell about 4% Thursday on the New York Stock Exchange, though through the previous close, the stock was up 17% this year. GE Aerospace said it is also facing inflationary pressure, which it is trying to manage by increasing prices of its products and services. It expects the supply chain constraints and inflation will continue, and is investing in its facilities to increase production and improve delivery times. Second quarter profit and sales were still up despite the disruptions. For the full year, GE Aerospace now expects adjusted earnings per share to be $7.65 to $7.85, up from a previous range of $7.10 to $7.40. Analysts are guiding for $7.56, according to FactSet. The company also anticipates adjusted revenue will increase by a percentage in the high teens, up from the lower double-digit percentage growth it was previously projecting. Profit from continuing operations was $2.41 billion, or $2.30 a share in the quarter ended June 30th, compared with a profit of $2.01 billion, or $1.87 a share a year earlier. Stripping out certain one-time items, adjusted per-share earnings were $2.02, ahead of the $1.86 anticipated by analysts, according to FactSet. Revenue rose 21% to $13.35 billion. Analysts surveyed by FactSet forecast revenue of $11.87 billion. Sales from GE's commercial engines and services segment jumped 27%, while the defense and propulsion technologies business had a 16% increase in revenue. Total orders increased 17%. You've been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 17th issue of the Wall Street Journal. We read from the Wall Street Journal every Monday through Thursday at 11 p.m. and Friday at 6 p.m. Your reader has been Dasha. Thank you for listening.
Coming up next in the Niagara Frontier Radio Reading Service, we have the Buffalo Criterion. At 8 o'clock, we have the New York Times. And at 9 o'clock, we have Discover Magazine. Stay with us for these readings and more. following program is intended for listeners who are blind, have low vision, or have another print disability